everyone. Welcome to Fans of Fandom. I'm your host, Dr. Eric Wesselmann, psychologist, professor, and full-time nerd. On this show, I have deep dive conversations with cool people about things that we're fans of. If you're joining us, chances are you're a fan too. Welcome aboard. Today, I am joined by my friend and colleague, Mr. Victor Dandridge Jr. Victor, please tell the audience a little bit about yourself.
Why, hello, I'm Victor Dandridge, a self-publishing comic creator from Columbus, Ohio. Self-publishing through my imprint, Vantage Announce Productions. I have earned the title of the hardest working man in comics for the myriad of things that I do, from self-publishing to being a phenomenological narratologist, of teaching the art of storytelling through my You Create comic series. I've had the great fortune to work with you, Eric, and the wonderful colleagues over at Illinois State University through ReggieCon and so many different projects. I'm all over the Comic Con world. So yeah, that's me in a nutshell, doing all the great things that a comic book fan like me could ever do.
Living the dream.
Absolutely, absolutely.
Welcome back to Fans of Fandom, Dark Ages. We're focusing on the iconic death of Superman. We spent a whole lot of time talking about just the lead up, just the marketing. Let's actually talk about the story.
It's worth it though. It's so worth it.
It is. Where you're shivering in anticipation.
Yes.
So I'm going to go back to sharing my screen because, as I mentioned earlier in our first intro, my first exposure to this was Superman 75, the death issue. I didn't actually get to read the earlier parts until I got the collected trade. So this is my second experience into the story. You know, I get to read Superman 75, which we'll unpack a lot later. You know, I'm reading the funeral issues, and then they release the collected edition of the first 7, right? The actual battle.
That's right.
And this is what I see when I pick that up off the rack.
That's right. That's right.
I still
listen. I just want to point out, for those of you that need to understand how good we had it back then and didn't know it, okay? This was a $5 trade. A $5 trade paperback that had 7 issues in it. And mind you, at the time, this would have been expensive. Like, this would have been considered expensive. But they brilliantly, and I do mean brilliantly, captured all of this in such a relative beautiful package that you know, again, I want to look at, so the cover pricing for all the books, and this is one of the reasons why I love this particular iteration, because it features on the back all 7 issues that are in this book. That is, I want to go back to this, okay? Comic book makers, creators, I think we should go back to this, where on the back end of a trade paperback, we actually show you the covers of the books that are featured in this. I think that would be a huge plus to people, because a lot of times when now we'll say, you know, in writing, oh, it has you know, issues this through this, but this is something even better because it shows you rather than tells you. And as a visual medium, I am a fan of show and not tell. Like, I just love that a lot. But the price point for each of these is $1.25. So they're losing money by collecting this in a trade paperback. It's all about the ease of readership that they created this. In order for you to, because again, as we saw before, there were opportunities for you to, you know, try to get the entire saga. They're telling you, don't miss out on the entire saga. And they collected it for you, almost at a loss for them, in order to make sure that you got this.
Yeah.
That's how important this story is to them.
Yeah, because I did miss out on some of those other issues. I was able to get a copy of the Justice League and then the Superman right after it.
Wow.
Which I think was, I think it was just regular Superman.
Regular Superman.
74.
Yeah. 74.
My eyesight's not what it used to be. But I had those two issues that I happened to get after I got the death, and I just found them. But as they became more scarce and speculation started getting higher, then it started being ridiculously expensive to even get any of the other ones. So this was my attempt to, or not my attempt, my ability to read the entire cage match. And for me, like, just visually getting drawn into the story, I'm just talking, experientially now, this cover, right? I mean, you've got the death of Superman right there at the top. You've got, then your eye goes down to the flag, right, to his tattered cape, which next to the bloody Superman symbol, which we see in the bottom left, those are the two most iconic images from this, right? You show those images and right, that what this is about. And then you get Lois in the throes of agonizing grief, right? I mean, this isn't just her crying, right? Which, anybody who's ever lost anyone, there's various different ways that you cry and you mourn, but this is the shock. This is raw. And so, like, I'm immediately triggered in that way, right? The empathic aspects of my brain are going off. And then you see Superman lifeless and bloody.
This is violent. Like, there's bloody, and then there's violent, and that's what this is. And I do want to point out, okay, so I know we don't really get this information until the beginning of Funeral, but Superman is heavy, right? Like, his physical person is heavy, and the idea of the grief that Lois is in, that she is holding him, is such a powerful statement, because he is limp at this point. That is a heavy individual. And how heavy is he? When another character, I don't want to give it away too soon, tries to perform CPR, comments on how difficult it is to try to do this, because of how just naturally dense Superman's body is. So for her to just wail and weep and moan and hold, like, that is a grief strength that she is operating with on this cover, and that just adds even more to that emotional impact of what's happening, because you're like, she is holding this man up, and he's gone, and she's not even there right now. Like, she is so far gone in this moment. It is devastating, absolutely devastating.
Yeah, we'll talk a little bit more about Lois later on, and then when we get to Funeral and Reign, Lois really takes center stage, right? I mean, it's so we'll spend a lot more time on her character later, but just we see this on the front cover, right? And then we turn to the back, and Victor's already talked about the importance of seeing the images, if for no other reason than a checklist, right? But I mean, this entire back cover is organized in a purpose.
Yes.
Right? I mean, so Victor, as a phenomenological narratologist, and visual creator, unpack the function of each one of these images as you see it, and then I'll weigh in.
Okay, so number one, the brilliance of this is so refined, actually. Okay, so generally speaking, when you get a graphic novel, trade paperback of some sort, there is a synopsis of the story that you're going to read. This doesn't have that. Like, literally, that headline is the synopsis. They graphically show you the synopsis and go, these are the books that are in it. Go. They don't explain anything else, but they do all at the same time. You see the little pieces of the actual newspaper. You can actually read that. That is an actual newspaper that was created, and it was featured in the black poly bag. If you popped yours open, you could actually get that newspaper, and you could actually read it and see what it is. And again, this is a totality of marketing brilliance in the design of this, because they're using graphics that they've been using to promote the entire event. So that image of Superman dead back there on the broken ground has been what they've been using to market this entire thing. So you can't come at this and go, what is this? You can't go, I don't know what this is about. This is snakes on a plane, right? Like that's the simplicity of what this is. Because come on, like nobody went in the snakes on a plane. Like, what is that movie about? Snakes on a plane. So when you see the death of Superman and you turn around Superman dead, you have a full understanding of what this book is about. And this is what makes it such a perfect reading device, is because the only question you have is how. How does this happen? And the only way you can answer it is to buy it and read it.
That's right.
There is no one has mastered a better visual showcase to encourage someone to just pick up something and read it than this book right here. I don't think I've ever seen anything that makes it that, like, okay, my favorite story for Superman is All-Star Superman. And you have this wonderful cover that's fantastic. And you flip it over, we have a synopsis. We have one image that's not the totality of the books that are involved here. It doesn't hit what this does. This is absolute visual storytelling simplicity. I'm gonna show you what is here. Superman is dead. These are the 7 books. Go ahead and read it. Ta-da.
And what's interesting, to go off to build off of what you just said, right? I'm struck by the thing, something that I find interesting about this sort of simplicity of storytelling and the elegance, right? Is Superman dead, right? I mean, that's your, as you noted, that's the abstract, that's the synopsis. You kind of have this sort of pseudo 3x3 grid going on, but not quite, right? It's not officially 3x3. It's all you've got the sort of Superman dead taking the place of what would be the first 2 in a 3x3 grid,
right?
Reverse line, right? And then at least in Western culture, reading left to right, top to bottom, right? We start with Superman dead, Metropolis Marvel killed in action. Then we go through each of the covers, and the covers themselves tell a story.
Yes.
So you've got Doomsday is the focus of part 1, right? I mean, this is his splash page on the cover, his official introduction. And then you have Justice League and their fight with him. Then you move into Superman, where technically speaking, Superman shows up in both part 1 and part 2, but he hasn't engaged Doomsday yet, right? And in part 1, he's engaging Underworld. In part 2, he's on TV, and then he finds out about Doomsday.
Right.
So then he joins in part 3, but he's with the Justice League, and they're still at a distance. Right. Then you get into the official 4-part, one fight, start to finish, no breaks. Right. Where it's just Superman and Doomsday mostly. There's a couple other characters who do
pop in
books, come in, Maxima Guardian, etc.
Right.
But look at those covers. I mean, the camera gets closer, the perspective, right? You've got them engaged in part 4, even more engaged grappling in part 5, and it gets getting closer. Part 6, it's right up in their business. All right. You've got all that blood on Superman. If there's any on Doomsday, it's Superman's blood.
You can't tell. Yeah, exactly.
I was reading one of the interviews, and one of the creators talks about how Doomsday is never cut.
That's true.
That's true. He actually, and we'll get in there, I guess, when we get to issue 75, but he's basically just bludgeoned, right? That's the only damage he takes for most of it, but Superman is the one who takes the brunt of it.
Stabbed, and he's beaten, blown up. Yeah.
And then you get 75, right? The newsstand edition cover, right? And now it's once again just one image, and it's really who it's about, right? Doomsday's the star of that part 1, and Superman and his sacrifice is the bookend on that 7. So just this, for me, I just see this as beautiful narrative storytelling right there.
Can we also talk about the narrative showcase of that first issue with Man of Steel 18, where Doomsday, as he's punching, is actually breaking up the title.
Yes.
And it is again, in terms of storytelling, perfect foreshadowing. They don't do it anymore, but that is telling you he is here to destroy Superman. Like they're telling you that right away from the beginning. That's what this is. And the evolution of the reveal of Doomsday is something that I think also plays into this very, very well. The idea that in every issue, if you were collecting these individually, in every issue you saw a little bit more of what Doomsday was until you got to the end. And absolutely brilliant.
That's it. I love the point you make about that interaction with the title. Because you don't see that very often in comics. I've occasionally seen it here. There's like a Silver Age Batman, I think, where I've seen something like that happen. There was the one of the issues in Dark Phoenix Saga, at least one issue, maybe a couple, where Phoenix interacts with the title, where she's like, where all the X-Men are on the ground and she's like holding it and crushing it, right? So there are some examples, but once again, when these things happen, they happen for a reason, right?
Exactly.
Just looking at these titles here, right? We've got Doomsday punching it out, as you've noted. We have a little bit of interaction in Justice League with Fire's hair. But it's sort of what we get from that is Fire's hair is in front of it, but it's still translucent.
Right.
You know, but Bloodwind's cape is behind the stuff, right? So you know, they chose to have Fire's hair that way. Why I'm not sure. Then you move down. The next time there's an interaction with the title is Superman 75 with the pole in front of, right? So they could have chosen to have that pole behind Superman, the logo, because you still would have gotten the cape.
But the idea is that this is the thing that's front and center. Yes. Brilliant. Absolutely brilliant. Again, like you said, the zeitgeist that was happening, the lightning in a bottle that was captured for this series, absolutely perfect. I don't think we'll ever get something like this ever again. I do want to note that in a funny haha, and one of the few times after a certain point, I think in the 80s, this is a DC comic that features the word Marvel on a cover.
Oh,
they don't do that very often. On the back, Metropolis Marvel killed in action. They rarely will ever put the word Marvel on a DC book. Because technically speaking, Marvel owns the trademark to that word. And that font even is very close to Marvel's font. So I'm very surprised that they did that.
I gotta wonder how many revisions did they have to do to that with going back and forth with legal?
With legal, I don't know. You know,
watch
unless
maybe someone related will watch this podcast and go,
come through and be like,
put in the comments.
Actually, that'd be amazing. Absolutely amazing.
Like, no one cared. We didn't even notice.
We didn't pay attention. I do also want to point out this little at the tip top bullet point. Doomsday Killer also slain. I just want to put a pin in that because we're gonna talk about that and the storytelling references to what that means.
Yes, yeah, and that's that was one thing. Not to step on where I think you're going with that, but just I'll put an aside here. Everybody knew when this was announced what the end was going to be, right?
Yes.
And you know, Victor hinted at that earlier. What you didn't know was how, right? And so when you look at some of the early trade press interviews with some of the creative staff or just general people writing their editorials about what they think the event is going to be, the assumption was that Doomsday was still going to be around afterwards.
Yes.
So that was, you know, that was also a surprise. And
very much so.
We will now build to. Interesting.
Very much so.
This is, you know, this of course went over a span of about a month or so, right? Each book came out weekly. So The actual time frame of the story, though, and comics in general deals with compressed time, but I've seen some of the creative staff in one interview or a couple different interviews speculate that the entire fight, at least we'll say issues or parts 4, 5, 6, and 7, so those last 4 issues, lasted about 4 hours in real time,
Wow.
and that the entire arc, I think, took maybe about 10 hours.
Okay.
So
that's interesting because when Doomsday appears, it's daytime. And when I think he intervenes with the Justice League, it's night, if I'm not mistaken. So from the time frame that so I want to say, let's I mean, we have it. Let's go ahead and look. Because I want to say that the Underworld story that Superman was involved in is kind of happening overnight.
Yes, yeah.
Because a kid has to do the luminescent spray paint to get Superman to even see stuff. So like Doomsday comes out at a point during the day, and he's doing stuff until he gets to a certain point of interacting with people that evening, and that's when the Justice League intervenes. And I can definitely see how from that point until Superman gets there is a certain amount of time.
Yeah.
And I think that's interesting.
Yeah, so yeah, it's a little unclear in the interview that I saw that speculated 8 to 10 hours when they were starting the stopwatch. And so it's probably safe to say then that's probably at the first superhero engagement with Doomsday.
Yeah.
So we'll assume that's when Justice League starts the battle.
And they show up.
Yeah. The things that we get in the weeds about.
Come on, this is this is the joy. This is what we do.
Yeah, this is what we do. Okay, so let's move into the individual issues. Just a couple pages that I pulled out that I'd like to talk about and then get your perspective on, Victor, as well. Sure. At the beginning of Man of Steel 18, you get those 4 teaser pages that had occurred in previous issues, collected and slightly tweaked in some of the narration, with the hands busting out, and then Doomsday busts out of the ground.
Here. And
what I have scanned here is essentially the 2-page spread. All right, you get they're not exact, they're neither of them are splash pages proper, right? Because they have different panels working together, but they kind of strike me as pseudo splash pages, right? I mean, your eyes really are drawn to the biggest figures, right? We get Doomsday on the left and this wonderful graphic match of Superman on the right. So tell me a little bit about how you experience this as a creator.
So this is a graphic form of foreshadowing, because here are these 2 characters that are on a collision course towards each other. And the interesting part is that they are not physically in the same space. So this is kind of a storytelling thing that says that their paths will eventually intertwine, that they will intersect at some point, and we're just not there yet. But that's kind of the brilliant storytelling feature of this. And what's really interesting is whether or not they were drawn at the same time or in sequence, because that can happen where an artist feeling, any certain kind of way, like, oh, I want to do this page, I want to do that page. Was that the specific aim artistically for them to be angling at each other to kind of suggest the way that they're going to intertwine later on in the story? It does suggest it. But again, understanding how books can be created, that may not have even been the intent. It could have just been that they happened to do this, and that wasn't actually the initial design aim. But once they put it together, they go, oh, this is kind of cool. And now you have this pseudo, storytelling editing trick that has occurred, that makes the creators look that much more brilliant for something that they did totally on accident. they didn't necessarily know that was the case. And the reason why I say that specifically is because in storytelling ventures, the right page that has Superman is wrong. So by way of leading the reader, you're supposed to lead the reader from left to right, top to bottom in English oriented comics, because that's the way that we read. His orientation is backwards from where we need to go. So there's nothing, like you can argue and kind of suggest that the speed lines of his ascent, which still is kind of a difficult thing to get to, lead you to the panel that you're supposed to get to of the little boy standing outside the hardware shop, but that's not a natural storytelling flow. So that's a good question. I would have to guess that they had to do those juxtaposed pages on purpose, because otherwise that's a violation of the way that that's read. Yeah, I would definitely say that must be the case. They had to do that on purpose. Wow.
Yeah. Wow. Yeah, I'm feeling, as I look at this, I'm almost like in the flow of my reading and body wise makes me just keep coming back to the left page. Right.
Yeah,
so I feel like I'm locked between Superman and Doomsday.
Yeah.
Based on how I usually read, right? So
yeah.
Yeah.
That's wild, because you can clearly see that the Doomsday, panel leads you to Superman. It takes you to that visual space of Superman's fist, and you're naturally supposed to come down, but that is not our norm because the action is telling us to come back the other way. So yeah, that's a very interesting narrative choice, visual narrative choice, to showcase something longer or bigger form of the story than really what is normal for comic storytelling.
Right, because it's in this issue, it's really sort of right. They're not meeting each other yet. This is, if I may, I think, co-opt a phrase from the Adam West Batman show, right? A taste of things to come.
Yes, absolutely.
Because then it moves into a more specific storytelling, it's sort of wrapping up a story that had been occurring in the previous issue of Man of Steel, right? And so this sort of this plot with the character of Keith and in his family, and the other sort of supporting cast that all the creators of these books had been building, right? And that was one thing they talked about in their interviews about Superman, not just what happens afterwards to the people who were left behind, but also just even in the Doomsday fight, ratcheting up the drama, because he has a host of characters that at this point in time readers are invested in. They care about this young man. They care about the orphanage that he grows up in. They care about all about the other different characters who are in Superman's world.
Yeah.
So, let's talk maybe a little bit about some of the other fun little flourishes here. Of course, we've got the sign in the paint shop there, right? The
Fleischer.
Reference the old Fleischer cartoons of Superman.
That's right. That's right.
What I love here too, also, so that's a fun little nod, a little Easter egg. But you don't have to necessarily know about the Max Fleischer cartoons to get that reference, right? I'm struck also by the use of the sound effect of doom here, right? They had been doing because it's not just doom isn't like the sound of an explosion, but Doomsday doom that's coming for Superman. There's multiple ways to experience that type of sound effect, right? And so from a storytelling perspective in comics, what are some different ways that sound effects can be played with and used? Well, how do you experience?
Oh man, so sound effects are this visual representation of sound, right? And there's a graphic design to it that kind of both kind of illustrates the severity, volume, and even the origin of the sound itself at times. So like if there's like a fire blast, the font types can be drawn to look like flames, so that when it says whoosh, you have kind of this sense of fire that's along with it. What I love about this particular one is the the kind of acceleration of the sound effect itself. So you have the crack, right? So it's technically smaller than the next one, which is crack, and then you get crack-a-doom. Like it becomes something that grows in the impact, to kind of show like this is something that is becoming more and more and more and more dangerous. It's not stopping, it's still happening, and the bigger it gets, the more dangerous it gets. And what I love is the idea that you get the crack of doom, and then on the next page it says Doomsday, but that's not a sound effect, that's title treatment. That's not something anyone hears, but it's such a cool alliteration to show a connection to what this thing that's coming out is going to be. And the other thing that I think is so amazing is it's the character's name before the character received the name.
Right.
That's hilarious.
Not diegetically, right? Yeah.
Right. You know, like this is, you know, that's what they've called it this whole time. Doomsday's coming. Doomsday's coming. Doomsday is this arc. We didn't know that that's what the character's name was really going to be, or how that character got its name. Like there's so many things that it's kind of showing you as a lead in. Absolutely brilliant.
Another yes, yeah. I mean, this is one of those images that as I've read interviews with the creative team, for example, writer Louise Simonson's talked about this a lot. I will speak from my own experience. I remember when I read it and I saw this as, you know, again, a 12-year-old, and I was like, wow, this dude's not effing around. Right? I mean,
evil.
Yeah. I mean, it goes to flat out horror movie here.
Yes. So in my 10-year-old little mind, this was the rawest, most evil thing I had ever seen in a comic, ever. Mind you, I didn't have a long history with comics yet, but I had never seen anyone be this. Like, there's bad guys. I want to take over the world. I want to rob the bank. I want to, you know, steal the girl. He kills this bird for no reason. Like, literally puts his hand out in a gesture of welcome just so he can kill it, and then laughs about it. There was like, seeing this gave a true understanding of how evil he was before he ever encounters a hero to fight. This dude is just malignant. Like, that's the only way you can describe him, is he's this malignant force. Because I mean, the bird is cheap. Like, what are you? I don't know what you are. And dies. What? Right. No remorse, no hesitation. As soon as the bird lands in his hand, he's like, "Oh, you're alive. I'm killing you. I'm killing you." And what I love is, okay, so we see this and we're like, "Oh, that's bad." It's not the only animal he kills.
Right.
It's not the only animal he kills. And in other media presentations, he kills bigger and worse animals, which I think is interesting. In the newer animated movie, he kills a bear just to kind of show like what he can do. And this idea that the first things that he kills are non-human really speaks to this idea of how non-human he is, because he doesn't matter to him. There is nothing sacred.
They're non-human, they're cute, they're right? It's a little bird and a deer.
Yes.
And what in both cases, actually, what also strikes me about this is, I'm gonna try to articulate this here. He's like evil hatred incarnate, but he is so peaceful and still, or he can give off that veneer that these normally skittish animals approach him.
Come to him. Like, that's the part that's so messed up. It's not that he tracked them down, hunted them, caught them, pounced. He's just waiting. I'm just waiting. I'm just this statue. Come on over. Land on me. It's fine. Psych, got you. Like, it is the most wrong I have ever seen. I don't know a bad guy, even now, that is done worse than this. And I know that sounds so silly. You're like, oh, in New X-Men, they killed 16 million mutants. This is worse. This is worse. There's no defense. Like, at least in the Genosha story, the X-Men could have fought back. A couple of people survived. This bird did nothing. But just be curious about, what is this? What are you? I don't even know what you are. And died. Ridiculous.
Yeah. So it's at a very visceral, almost elemental level, right?
Yes.
Yeah, it's blorch, right? And pretty much.
Oh, so bad. You talk about the idea of sound effects. You know what that sounds like. Like you taste that sound effect.
Yeah.
And the rawest part is when he starts laughing afterwards.
Yep. Yeah.
Because he at least has some sense that in his detriment, in his I don't know, destructive whatever, he finds it funny.
Right. It's not like he's not like a great white shark, right? That
right.
Mechanically, right? There is
yeah.
So
I even have to compare it, like, okay, so in the first Halloween movie, there's a scene where Michael Myers picks up a guy and stabs him, and then he just kind of turns his head, ever so curious. It's like, that happened. Like, he's not sure of what was going to happen after I stuck this long knife through this guy. Like, he's just like, oh, that's interesting. Like, there's a curiosity that is almost innocent and pure. Not laughing. Laughing is not that. Like, laughing is a true that's the word I was looking for. Diabolical reaction. He laughs wrong. That is just wrong.
Right, because you can compare, for example, the shape Michael Myers or Jason, right, with Freddy Krueger, another of the sort of slasher-ish villains of that time, and the other two are more mechanical. Right? There could be an emotional detachment in the case of the shape, although it depends on how he's written, because sometimes he's written as to be evil incarnate as well.
True.
Jason, it seems to be revenge based, just stay out of my woods.
Right.
But with Freddy, he enjoys.
He's maniacal. He does. Yes. Right. He quips. He makes fun of you and then kills you. That's mean.
Right. So I guess, yes, Doomsday would be the Freddy Krueger of this slasher film. That
Absolutely.
is definitely. All right, so let's I think go to part 2. I think is next on my list, and it's actually a nice sort of pithy way of describing what we've just been leading into. We didn't plan it this way, and that's Maxima. The character of Maxima has telepathic powers, and she tries to connect with Doomsday, and this is her description. This is the first description we get of him, of his characterization through the eyes of someone else, right? He's hate, death, and bloodlust personified, nothing more. I mean, we could have just gotten that from the war.
Squishing the bird. Yeah. Fair game, they weren't there, but this is human combatants, humanoid combatants that are getting an understanding of what he is. Now, one of the things I do want to point out, if you're reading this, this moment is wrapped in a mystery, and that mystery is the character Bloodwind, where Bloodwind has appeared and has become a member of the team, but others are not necessarily certain of his allegiance. Like, there's a mystery behind, like, what is this guy? Who is this guy? He's told us where his powers come from, but certain members aren't 1,000,000% sure that he's being upfront and upright with them. And this moment is interesting because it's showcased as this opportunity for one of the members to kind of fact check for Bloodwine, but Maxima intervenes in a way unknowingly that kind of intercepts that moment. So there's this mystery that is occurring through this story that gets a huge break in the midst of the story, and we find out in the aftermath in a Justice League series what that was all about. I thought that was one of the most interesting things with the Justice League's appearance here, because as a newcomer to comics at the time, I had no understanding of what was actually happening until later. And this is one of those times where editorial notes, continuity, such a brand new concept to me, huge opportunity with what this is setting up. So I just want to throw that out there as this very interesting contextual thing of what Maxima is telling us, but then there's something else that's happening amongst the team that is its own little bit of turmoil that's got nothing to do with Doomsday, which is brilliant.
Mm. And if you're interested, you can buy the trade of Justice League America during this time.
Yes,
Well.
Get it.
Yeah, and see what happens to them after. Well, we'll see what happens. To leave it to that. Now, so while the Justice League is going to intercept Doomsday, not knowing what they're getting into, but starting to get a little taste from what we see from Maxima here. The other story that's going in tandem is Superman is being interviewed by a high school. And the storyline, it's interesting because they juxtapose the action, the fight of the Justice League and Doomsday, especially as it gets more brutal, with what's going on in Superman's conversation with these students. And these threads start to converge, and you experience them, one influencing the way you read the other. And when we start to get a sense of just how nasty Doomsday is through the Justice League's eyes, we have this example of a student who asks Superman, like, what scares him? And he talks about in a very cool way the variety of things that scare him. Afraid of failing, people getting hurt, and these things we talk about. And then you get this moment of vulnerability, right? Where he's like, he's the most powerful hero certainly on the planet. Right. He can lift planets, right? Unless it's up to this point in time, unless it involved kryptonite or magic, nothing could really do anything to him. Even his clothing, right, was pretty much more or less indestructible.
Showcased as invulnerable. Absolutely.
Yeah. And so he says here, I've encountered, things powerful enough to kill me. And this is something that, as we unpack these issues, become his sense of his own mortality, this existential threat, becomes more salient to him in his own characterization. So. And then, as we will talk about probably several episodes down the road, when we talk about the legacy of this story, and we've already told you that Doomsday is stopped. He's killed at the end of this. Just like Superman, he comes back. And this idea of fear is going to become even more important to this relationship between these two characters. So, a taste of things to come.
Absolutely. I do want to point out, from a narrative standpoint, how clever this is as a storytelling structure. So we've got Superman is in Metropolis at the Cat Grant show, being interviewed by Cat Grant, and it's got this live studio audience. This is a live telecast of this interview, and it is being watched by high school students in Ohio. And one of the key students, Mitch, becomes a figurehead in the next chapter of the story. And the way that they introduce Mitch as a character, his placement in relation to the greater story, one of the best correlating coincidental story pieces I've ever seen written. There's a lot of stories that I've seen that require coincidence in order for things to happen. This is a fabulous showcase of coincidence that drives the story forward. It's so I'm okay. So full admission, I'm not a fan of Rogue One, because I feel like that movie requires way too much coincidence to narratively be strong. If this thing doesn't happen, this thing can't happen later, and this thing can't happen later. So it requires way too much coincidence.
Mhm.
But the idea of what this coincidence structure is so authentic. You know, this kid is watching this interview. He has a disdain for Superman. He is the embodiment of, I prefer the rough and tumble guy, not the goody two shoes Superman. And then what that looks like when it comes back around, chef's kiss. But the way that they introduce him through this vehicle, so good.
That's right. Mitch, in many ways, and I'll try not to give too much away because we'll come to a couple panels that really drive it home. But yeah, he and his friends are cracking jokes. They're talking about how, you know, Superman is boring, that he's too goody two shoes, and they're big fans of Guy Gardner, who at this point in time, you know, had been kicked out of the Green Lanterns, for being too cavalier, even more so than Hal Jordan, right? So it's like, you know, someone who's even reckless, more cavalier than Hal Jordan, they kicked him out. And he's the way I sort of experienced Guy, especially thinking about it in this lens of the darker Iron Ages that we've talked about, is he's the Justice League's equivalent of a Wolverine or a Punisher, right? Or, you know, some of these anti-heroes, right? There's also Lobo in this universe as well. And there's a spectrum of degree of grittiness. But Guy Gardner's about as much as the Justice League and Superman will tolerate.
Right? Well, you gotta look at what Guy does when he's kicked out of the Lantern Corps. He goes and gets a accordion ring. This is pre Sinestro Corps. So essentially he got a ring like Sinestro has and becomes this anti-Green Lantern, because at the time the Lanterns had an impurity or weakness to the color yellow. So he literally got a weapon that would allow him to beat up any Green Lantern he came across as kind of a recompense for the fact that they kicked him out of their boys club. That was his choice. That is such a raw, very anti-hero thing to do, to go from this uniformed, I'm supposed to be this, you know, police officer, you get deemed too reckless as a cop, get kicked off of the squad, and you go find the one weapon that purposefully is designed to fight the cops. And you still have the audacity to be like, nah, I'm still going to be a Justice League member. Oh, y'all got Green Lanterns on the team? I don't care. Like, I'm Guy Gardner. I'm here to kick ass and chew bubblegum, and I am fresh out of bubblegum. He is the embodiment of that. He fights in cowboy boots, like a tucked in leather jacket. This dude he has no chill. He shows up in jeans. Like everyone else has a uniform. He just picked up some clothes and was like, yeah, I'm fighting in this now. This is what I'm doing. Amazing. Amazing.
Well, I think if you know, all these things you're saying makes me think that, like, if the Comics Code would have let DC get away with it, Guy Gardner would have totally made a middle finger construct in yellow.
Absolutely. As a matter of fact, I think Guy Gardner, if the Comics Code Authority would have allowed it, Guy Gardner would have shown up in Green Lantern books and caused problems. He would have caused problems. Yeah. He would have shown up and been in the way, and when anybody tried to tell him to leave, he'd beat him up. And like he would have disrupted the entire structure of what that was. Because I mean, okay, again, guys, y'all gotta hear us at the time period of this. The Green Lantern ring, arguably the greatest weapon in the universe, right? It had a tagline for a long time, but its weakness was the color yellow, and as such, Guy gets a yellow ring. And just as a statement of his attitude, doesn't wear yellow. Like, that's not even his color scheme still. He's still just like, I don't care. I've got the one thing that can top the greatest weapon in the universe. I'm not even devoting my own costume color scheme to gold. I'm gonna wear blue and brown boots, whatever. And I'm still gonna rock you. Like, amazing. And you and then bringing it back into sort of Superman was part, you know, previous to Justice League America, Superman was never an official member
of the Justice League.
Right.
He just kind of like would help out when needed, when the writers wanted.
Right.
And but this time when Jurgens was writing both Superman itself and then Justice League America, he brought in Superman as an official member, right? And then brought in Guy Gardner as an official member. And so the issues leading up to this, you had this constant tension. It's like in the X-Men, right? You got Cyclops and Wolverine.
Yep.
You know, ultimate authority figure, and you know, high conscientious, follow the rules, and the one who's like, yeah, no, I don't want anything to do with that.
I don't want none of that. None of it.
That same tension playing out here.
Yeah.
And then that tension is important for understanding how their characters evolve just in this story arc, both in the death and then funeral that we'll talk about later. And
you also have the third party factor of a love interest. Now, for Superman, it was unrequited, but Ice always was written to have like a crush on Superman, and Guy was always chasing Ice, like always. And so Guy Gardner felt a certain kind of way towards Superman because Superman was capturing Ice's attention, and she wouldn't pay attention to Guy. And so he hated him for that. Like, oh, he's just gonna strut around here. Like, he has such a very Lex Luthor frame of mind when it comes to Superman. It's not even funny. Like, that's a partnership that could have been dangerous right there.
Yeah. Later on in this story, then of course Justice League engages and get Guy Gardner first goes off Cavalier and gets his head stomped in and his eyes swollen shut in a very, I mean, well, there's lots of visceral violence done to all these characters, but you get a lot of that, and then that really makes the Justice League go, holy crap, what did we get ourselves into?